Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it.
I've always been a Christian. I grew up as a Lutheran. I'm really non-denominational now. I don't really follow one. I think, hopefully it's all the same God. I think that there's arguments over my God's better than your God are ridiculous to me.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Never in the history of covering theists on this channel, never has the theist included the refutation to their own argument.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arm.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all very welcome to another episode of the most, and I mean the most, annoying religious people. I'm going to be honest with you today, dear listener. I'm in no mood. If I seem a little bit cranky today, it's because I am truthfully not in the form for this today. I don't mean I'm not in the form for making a YouTube video. I bloody love making YouTube videos. I love putting out content for you guys to digest, and I love hearing your responses and so on. That's not what I mean. I mean that I'm really not in the form today to listen to the kind of, I'm just going to say it, bullshit that we're about to listen to. This channel really is an exercise in masochism. I must hate myself because I endure a form of extreme torture every single time I sit down and record one of these. So with that said, we're going to dive right in here today. Up for today, folks, is one Kevin Sorbo, and I'll forgive you if you never heard of him. Disappointed! This guy was massive in the 90s. He was a star of the hit TV show Hercules. He was also in a show, I think it was called Andromeda, if I'm not mistaken. And he's basically done nothing since, and he claims to have been quote-unquote cancelled by Hollywood. I'm not going to get into that. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. I don't really care. I'm not here today to discuss that. I'm here today to discuss his Christianity and his views about atheists and atheism. And this guy is just a colossal idiot. He is a moron. And without further ado, we're just going to get into this. You don't need to take my word for it. His words will speak for themselves.
Well, I am here with Kevin Sorbo. Kevin, good to see you. Thank you for being with us. The excitement about a movie. Now, I'm excited about God's Not Dead, but you're a movie man, so... but yet you're saying that there's a momentum, there's an anticipation about this movie. Talk a little bit about the feedback you're getting from just the people that you interact with about God's Not Dead.
Well, it's actually huge. I mean, from what PureFlix is telling me as well, the number of churches that are signing up every week to promote it, let people know about it. But just, you go on the internet and look at the millions of hits that the movie's getting and people viewing it.
For those of you who aren't aware, God's Not Dead is a Christian film that came out in 2014. And apparently it was a success at the box office insofar as Christian films are concerned. But it's a completely atrocious film, philosophically, in terms of the acting that's going on, in terms of the script.
You've seen the science and the arguments. Science supports his existence. You know the truth.
If you want to have a good laugh with your mates, sit down and watch God's Not Dead, because it's pretty damn hilarious.
It's going to be I know there's going to be a kickback in a negative way from people that are atheists, and they're going to take it obviously an attack on what they believe in, which is nothing. But so we'll see what happens.
That's true.
Oh, goodness gracious me. So that's the caliber, folks. That's the level we're at. Yeah. Atheists believe in nothing. Good one. What are you even supposed to say to this? What an appalling statement. Look, guys, let's get the obvious out of the way. Atheism is a single belief on a single issue. Fine. People say God exists. Atheists say, well, we're not convinced. Why? Well, because you haven't satisfied your burden of proof. You haven't proven that your God exists. So we're just going to sit over here and be unconvinced until you satisfy that burden of proof. That is atheism in a nutshell. So atheism is a single belief on a single issue. There's no such thing as the atheist view on X, Y, or Z. That's not a thing. There might be statistical prevalences amongst atheists. So, for example, the view that church and state should be separated. I'm going to go ahead and wager that the majority of atheists believe that. But that's not because there's some atheist doctrine somewhere that says one ought to believe in church-state separation. It's because church-state separation is obviously a good idea if you're a minority. It's obviously a good idea for the majority faith to not have primacy when it comes to governance, because that leads to discriminatory practices. It leads to all sorts of negative consequences that you can observe in the world if you just take a look at literally any theocracy. The key point is, atheism is a single belief on a single issue, but it does not follow from that therefore atheists believe in nothing. The idea that I'm an atheist, so therefore I believe in nothing, aside from being an obvious non sequitur, it's just completely false. Atheists believe in many things, but leave it to a bigoted, moronic Christian like Kevin Sorbo to assume, just because you don't agree with his mythology, that therefore you believe in quote-unquote nothing. This is utterly ridiculous. He is a moron with a capital M. And the smug manner that he delivers this statement in, well, they believe in nothing. They're
going to take it obviously an attack on what they believe in, which is nothing. But so...
But anyway, I'm just going to move on because I've probably dedicated too much time to this comment already. So let's proceed.
Now we've just seen the trailer, and obviously your role there's an energy, there's a passion. I mean, you play this role as realistically as I've ever seen anyone play an atheist role. Was that something you had to study? Did you have any sense of the pain of that through some of your own journey?
Well, I'm in Hollywood, so
you hear this.
It's all right there in front of me already. But
you'd have to see the movie to appreciate this point, so I won't spend long on this. But no, he doesn't play the role convincingly at all. If you haven't seen the movie, dear listener, spoiler alert, although you're not missing much, unless, as I pointed out earlier, you want to sit down and have a big old laugh with your mates. The movie centers around a kid who joins a university and goes into this philosophy class. Kevin Sorbo plays the atheist professor who's trying to convince all of his students that God doesn't exist. Long story short, it is ultimately revealed that the professor does believe in God, but he's angry with God. The reason he claims not to believe is because God, quote unquote, took everything from him.
Why do you hate God?
Because he took everything away from me.
Yeah, a very convincing portrayal of an atheist. The entire movie is basically an ad hominem attack. The entire movie is a straw man of atheists and atheism. The movie invites us to believe that atheists don't really have any truth on their side. They don't really disbelieve in God. They're not really unconvinced. They really do believe in God deep down. They're just angry. Atheists are simply people who are angry with God and who reject him because they're not happy with their lot in life or because they don't want to be judged by a higher power. This is what the movie portrays atheists as. So, no, dear host, it's not a convincing portrayal of atheists or atheism. It's a laughable straw man. It's an ad hominem attack. It ushers in the currency of insult. It pretends as though atheists are simply angry people who really do believe in God but reject him based on their own petty unhappiness in life. It is revolting. Anyway, just in case you weren't aware, dear listener, that is what the movie represents atheist as. It is a joke. It is completely, as I've already said, completely and utterly revolting. Accuracy was not the goal here. Anyway, let's move on.
Do you find the average person thinks there is no evidence, it's just a matter of faith and it's blind? That seems to be maybe the mindset of that faith has no evidence. Yeah. But yet I think what this movie's trying to show is that no, real faith isn't blind. Yeah. There's reasons to believe. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think that's where the word faith came from. I mean, my discussions with the atheists that I know are, look, if I'm wrong, I've lost nothing. But I believe that I'm right and I'm going to gain everything.
Oh, brother. This is bottom of the barrel, folks. I apologize, dear listener. I'm sorry for wasting your time today. At least we can laugh along. At least we can poke fun at it. Two things on this. The host points out that real faith isn't blind and that there are, in fact, good reasons to believe.
I think what this movie's trying to show is that no, real faith isn't blind. Yeah. There's reasons to believe. Any thoughts on that?
This might be a pedantic point, but I do think it's relevant, dear listener. As always, you can be the judge. If indeed there are, quote-unquote, good reasons to believe in God, then why would faith be necessary? This is something that just doesn't make sense to me. One either has good reasons for what they believe, or they do not. That is a true dichotomy, folks, which is to say there are no other options available. Something either has good reasons to support it, or it does not have good reasons to support it. There are no other options. There's no middle ground there. I'm talking about the laws of logic here. Something either is or isn't. There can't be a middle ground between is and isn't. It's the law of the excluded middle. So there are either good reasons or there aren't good reasons. Where does faith fit into that? Unless you're using the word faith as a synonym for having good reasons, there's no room for the word faith. If it's just a synonym for reason, then why not just use the word reason? The reason that atheists view the word faith negatively is because whenever we put Christians or theists more generally in a corner in a debate, they pull the faith card. They say, oh, well, look, you just got to have faith. Well, that's not you deploying faith as a synonym for, well, look, you just got to have good reasons. That's you pulling the faith card in the presence of a robust argument that reveals you don't have good reasons. So if the word faith means reason, it's redundant. And if it means something else, it's also redundant and irrelevant. So I don't see any good reason, speaking of reasons, to deploy this word. If you have good reasons for believing in God, then that's all you need. And if you want to use the word faith as a synonym for reason, that's fine. But people like me are going to hold your feet to the fire on that. I'm not going to get into a word debate with you. If you want to use it as a synonym and you clarify that that's the way you're using it, fine. You use whatever word you want. But Christians don't use the word that way in my experience. And if you speak to other atheists, they will tell you similar stories. So I just think you need to dispense with this word faith. If you have good reasons, then that's the reason you believe. Faith is utterly irrelevant. But with that linguistic point out of the way, the elephant in the room here is Kevin Sorbo's pivot to Pascal's wager. He says that, well, if he's wrong, he's got nothing to lose.
If I'm wrong, I've lost nothing.
What a moronic statement. Pascal's wager has been so thoroughly debunked. It has been so thoroughly dissected, critiqued, and rendered irrelevant that the only explanation for Sorbo deploying it here is that he's just completely ignorant. Anybody who's reading the arguments for God's existence, any student of philosophy, anybody who has studied the arguments for God's existence for a day knows that Pascal's wager is junk. What do you mean you have nothing to lose? So he is assuming here that there are only two possibilities. Either his chosen faith is the real faith, or there's nothing. Now, if that were true, he'd be right. He'd be right, at least in terms of the consequentialist argument here. If there's only Christianity or nothing, and you put your bet on belief, well, if you're wrong, you die and you're dead forever and you'll never know. And if you're right, you go to heaven. So the consequentialist arithmetic here plays out in your favor. The problem is, this isn't a true dichotomy. It's not. You can't say that it's either Christianity or nothing, because you haven't ruled out any of the other gods or faiths that are on offer. If Buddhism is true, you're doomed to go around the wheel of samsara for eternity for failing to live an enlightened life, for failing to live by the 5 moral precepts, or for failing to live by the 6 perfections, or for failing to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. You're going to be reborn again and again and again forever until you figure out that you're following the wrong faith. Now, granted, in Buddhism, it is possible to become enlightened even though you're not a Buddhist, but I can tell you right now, knowing what I do about the Noble Eightfold Path, and knowing what I know about the 5 moral precepts and so on, Kevin Sorbo is not living a life that is becoming of the Buddhist vision. I can tell you that with certainty, dear listener, knowing the little I do about Buddhism. If Islam turns out to be the religion that's the one true God, now granted, I know Christians and Muslims believe in the same God, but the tenets and how exactly to follow that God are different. Kevin Sorbo, for example, isn't praying 5 times a day. He doesn't practice Ramadan, right? And so on and so forth. So if Islam is the one true religion, well, Kevin Sorbo could potentially go to Islamic hell. If Buddhism is true, as I've already said, he's going to go around the wheel of samsara for eternity and never achieve enlightenment. So he has just as much to lose if any of the other religions are the one true religion. So this wager that Pascal poses, this idea that you have nothing to lose if you place your bet on belief, is hogwash because it engages in the faulty assumption that there are only 2 options, Christianity or nothing. The truth is there are actually many more options. All that said, there are even more problems here. Namely, even if he's correct that there are only 2 options, he still has an enormous amount to lose. Even if his dichotomy were correct, even if I grant him that it's just Christianity or nothing, he still has an immense amount to lose. Because if he's wrong and the true answer is that when we die, we're dead and gone forever, you have wasted your one and only life worshipping a god and wasting your time on a religion for no good reason. Every single time you spent an hour at church, every single time you got down on your knees in a church pew, every single time that you prayed by your bedside, all of that was a massive opportunity cost. All of that was a waste of your only existence. And let's face it, we don't live for very long, folks. What's 80 or 90 years in the grand scheme of things in a universe that's approximately 13.8 billion years old? What's 80 or 90 years? It's the blink of an eye. Your life ends just as soon as it begins in the cosmological sense of time. So there is an enormous opportunity cost if indeed he's wrong. And this, by the way, is me granting that his erroneous dichotomy is true. Even then, this idea that you've lost nothing by dedicating your life to a folly, that just doesn't follow. It's a nonsense point, and nobody should take it seriously. Pascal's wager is garbage. And the final problem I'll address in relation to Pascal's wager that Kevin Sorbo poses here It assumes something called doxastic voluntarism. It assumes that your beliefs are subject to your whim. Pascal poses this wager and invites us to place our bet to, in other words, choose to believe in God. Because if you run the arithmetic there of the decision matrix, the only bet that leads to an unpleasant outcome, according to Pascal and Kevin Sorbo, is if you place your bet on non-belief, because you're risking your infinite afterlife and you're risking ending up with an eternal punishment, be it annihilation, hell, or what have you. But again, this assumes doxastic voluntarism, which is the thesis that one can choose their beliefs. This is not the case. You cannot choose your beliefs, dear listener. And I've gone over this many times on the channel in the past. You can do a little mental experiment with yourself right now. I'm assuming, dear listener, for example, that nobody watching this video believes that they have the ability to fly. So I'm going to invite you right now to choose to believe that you can fly. Please notice that no matter how hard you try, no matter how many times you repeat it, I can fly, I can fly, I can fly, there's no way you can convince yourself that you can fly. The pedantic among you will say, oh, I do believe I can fly. I'll just board a plane. Yeah, fine. I'm talking about flying unaided by technology. I'm talking about you being able to jump out the window right now and sprout wings or flap your arms and being able to fly. You will not be able to convince yourself of your ability to do this, no matter how many times you try to choose to believe that, because our beliefs are not subject to free will. Our beliefs are involuntary. Our beliefs are deterministic. So Pascal's wager is debunked from the word go. Even if it were all correct, even if the dichotomy were true, even if we accepted the decision matrix as Pascal presents it, even if Kevin Sorbo were bang on the money here, I wouldn't be able to choose to accept the wager because my beliefs are not subject to my whims. Doxastic voluntarism is bullshit. So this argument can't even get off the ground if it could even be considered an argument, more of a gambit than anything. So, guys, Pascal's wager does not work, and the fact that Kevin Sorbo presents it here so nonchalantly demonstrates his philosophical ignorance. He does not know what he's talking about. He does, in fact, have just as much to lose as you or I, assuming you're an atheist, dear listener. If you're not an atheist and you're a theist watching, you're very welcome to the channel, by the way. I would welcome your criticism on this point. If you think I've misunderstood Pascal, if you think I've misunderstood Sorbo here, jump into the comments below and let me know. But yeah, in my view, dear listener, Pascal's wager is junk. It is bottom of the barrel. There are far better arguments, in my view, far better points that a theist can make if they want to convince their interlocutor of their faith. You need to abandon Pascal's wager, and your apologetics will improve by default. And with all that said and out of the way, let's move on.
To me, it's, you just look around you. This didn't happen. Something started all this. How did you look at the heaven, you look at the stars, you look at the infinity of space, and it's mind-boggling to think that it just happened on its own. There was something, there's someone, there's some supreme person, being that started all this.
A textbook argument from ignorance fallacy, if ever I witnessed one. I dare say this is probably the best example of this fallacy that I've ever heard uttered, because he basically utters the fallacy word for word without even realizing it. Kevin Sorbo says that the universe is mind-boggling, the infinity of space, how all this could have gotten here. It's mind-boggling. Therefore, there must be some kind of a being, an ultimate power, an agent, a god who put it all here.
You look at the heaven, you look at the stars, you look at the infinity of space, and it's mind-boggling to think that it just happened on its own. There was something, there's someone, there's some supreme person, being that started all this.
Translation: I don't understand how all of this happened, therefore God. Can you believe it, dear listener? Can you believe it? Oh my goodness gracious me. Thank you for this gift, Kevin Sorbo. I'm starting to get into this video. I started this in no mood, but boy, this is fun. My God, this is bad. An argument from ignorance fallacy, folks, is when your interlocutor says that their conclusion must be true because you can't think of a better explanation. In common parlance, it's when somebody says that you can't think of a better answer, therefore mine must be correct. And that's what he's saying here. Kevin Sorbo is pointing out that because he can't think of an explanation for the infinity of space or for the cosmos or for the universe, because he can't think of an explanation, therefore his chosen mythology must be correct. Therefore, there must be a divine being, an agent, a god. This is completely and utterly fallacious. By way of analogy, I often use the following in order to explain it. This is the equivalent of seeing something flying through the sky, not knowing what it is, and then saying, goodness, I don't know what that is, therefore it must be aliens. Your not knowing, your ignorance about what's flying through the sky does not serve as evidence for your presupposition that the unidentified object, I won't even say flying, because if something is in the air, it doesn't necessarily follow that it's flying. That would be a non sequitur. Something could be falling through the air. Something could be gliding through the air towards the earth. That's not flight, that's gliding. That's a different thing. Flight implies that you can ascend, not just descend, I would argue. It could also just be a planet, a star, a distant cosmological phenomenon. I don't know. None of this gets you to a flying object, and it certainly doesn't get you to aliens. Your ignorance about what's flying through the sky does not serve as evidence for your presupposition. And likewise, Kevin Sorbo's ignorance about the universe and about how it all got here does not serve as evidence for his God. And anybody who suggests otherwise is a colossal idiot. Anybody who suggests otherwise is a moron, folks. Some people get upset when I throw out these terms and these words. I've had people private message me and say, Magic Skeptic, I really do like your content and I think your arguments are good, but you could certainly desist with the ad hominem attacks. Stop calling people morons. Stop calling people idiots. This isn't an ad hominem attack, folks. Let me just say that right off the bat. Anybody who says that I've just engaged in an ad hominem attack doesn't know what an ad hominem attack is. An ad hominem fallacy is the fallacy wherein somebody, rather than dealing with the argument, addresses the person making the argument. So rather than dealing with Kevin Sorbo's argument, rather than pointing out the flaws and the fallacies in it, I just say, Kevin Sorbo, you're an idiot, therefore this argument is wrong. That would be an ad hominem attack, folks. This isn't an ad hominem attack. Yes, I've called him a moron. Yes, I've called him an idiot. And I'm probably going to call him that several more times before the video ends. But I addressed his argument first. I've pointed out the fallacy. I've pointed out the argument from ignorance. I've dissected the argument and showed where it's flawed and why it's flawed. And then, only after that, given how ridiculous his argument is, then and only then did I conclude that he's an idiot. Because his argument is so poor. An ad hominem attack is arguably the exact opposite to that. It would be me starting with the allegation that he's an idiot. It would be the refusal to deal with his actual argument. And it would be me concluding that he's wrong simply because he's an idiot. That is not what I'm doing here. Some people misunderstand the ad hominem fallacy and assume that an ad hominem fallacy is simply when you insult someone. An insult does not an ad hominem fallacy make, folks. An ad hominem fallacy is when you attack the person instead of their argument. I've arguably done both. I've revealed the fallacy in the argument and I've pointed out why it's flawed and why it's nonsense. And then on the basis of how bad that is, I've also concluded that he's a moron. This is not an ad hominem attack, folks. And I just wanted to clarify that before I go any further with addressing this idiot. And one final comment here before we move on. Please notice the insinuation. He says that this couldn't have happened on its own.
And it's mind-boggling to think that it just happened on its own.
I might be mistaken here, dear listener, but I think the implication there is that atheists must believe that all of this happened on its own. And that's not the case. I'm an atheist. I don't believe that all of this happened on its own. I don't know how all of this happened. I have the humility and the honesty to say, I don't know how all of this got started. I don't even know if all of this had a beginning. I don't know. Scientists are working on it. There are different models of the universe. Some of them assume a finite beginning. Some of them assume an infinite past. But there's no scientific consensus. We don't have the answer yet. Maybe we will someday, or maybe we never will. And if we never have the answer about how all of this got started, I will continue to say in the future what I'm going to say now. I don't know. Please notice that my ignorance here isn't used as a launch pad to assume something about what's actually going on. I'm happy to admit that I don't know how the universe started. I don't even know if it had a beginning. I simply do not know. But you see, theists are in the business of knowing things that other people don't know. They know that the universe had a beginning. They know that it was started by an infinite being that they call God. They even know the nature of that God. Trinitarians, for example, will say that it's 3 persons in one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Christians more generally claim to be able to pray to this God. They claim that this God sent his only begotten Son to die for our sins. They claim to know that this guy came back from the dead. They claim to know how life started. They claim to know all sorts of things about biology, about physics, about cosmology, and so on and so forth. Things for which they have no good evidence. Things for which they have no good arguments. But they know all of this stuff. And here I am, the so-called arrogant atheist, telling you, in humility, I don't know how it all started. I don't even know if the universe had a beginning. But Kevin Sorbo here insinuates, at least in my view, that atheists are the people who believe that all of this came out of nothing, that all of this just happened. Garbage. Absolute garbage. And yes, I'm going to say it again. He is a moron, not an ad hominem attack, folks, which is why I'm going to keep saying it. He's a moron. Let's move on.
I've always been a Christian. I grew up as a Lutheran. I'm really non-denominational now. I don't really follow one. I think, hopefully it's all the same God. I think that this arguments over my God's better than your God are ridiculous to me.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Never in the history of covering theists on this channel, never has the theist included the refutation to their own argument. He just debunked Pascal's wager in his own soliloquy. Minutes ago, he says that he's got nothing to lose and that he's placing his bet on belief and he's got everything to gain and he thinks he's right, he's got everything to gain, and if he's wrong, well, he's got nothing to lose.
If I'm wrong, I've lost nothing.
And here he says, well, I hope it's all the one God.
Hopefully it's all the same God.
In other words, he's acknowledging the flaw in his own Pascalian wager. He hopes it's all the one God. Well, what if it isn't, Kevin Sorbo? If it isn't all the one God, if you're following the wrong God, gee, I wonder what that means for you. You know what it means, which is why he laughed. It means that you're in the same position as me, you fucking idiot. You idiot. Are you kidding me? He acknowledges the flaw in Pascal's wager in his very own soliloquy, folks. I could not have asked for a better theist to respond to for today's video. This is absolutely hilarious. You hope it's all the same God, Kevin Sorbo. Well, I've got some news for you. If there is no God, or worse still, I would argue, if it's another God that's the one true God, well, you're screwed, buddy. In other words, despite what you said earlier, despite your Pascalian wager, you actually have just as much to lose as I do. Placing your bet on belief doesn't cover all the options. It doesn't. This is the equivalent of placing your bet on a roulette table on the number 17. All of the other numbers can still come up when we put that ball on the wheel, Kevin Sorbo. And I think that's what he just realized in his very own soliloquy. And it's just beautiful, folks. It is beautiful. And with that acknowledged, let's move on.
Near the end of season 5 on Hercules, the last 3 months, I kept having problems with my left arm. I couldn't figure what was going on with it. These fingers kept getting cold. There was pain through the shoulder. And I was blowing it off. I was doing my own stunts. I grew up playing football and basketball, these sports in Minnesota, and I just thought, I was not pay attention to it. Flew back, finished season 5, flew back to shoot a movie in Atlanta. In LA, I stopped to do some promotional work on a movie that was coming up that I shot in Bratislava. It was called Kull the Conqueror, the prequel of Conan the Barbarian. Okay. So I went to see my doctor. He found a lump in my shoulder. That lump ended up being an aneurysm. And before they could do anything, it had been spitting clots off into my arm, into my fingers, making them cold and numb, slowly over a period of time. Before we could do anything about it, before I found out the problem I had, I went to see my chiropractor. As I laid on the table, I heard a voice inside me that said, don't let him crack your neck. And I opened my eyes, I said, did you say something to me? I said, I didn't say anything. Closed my eyes again, right away, do not let him crack your neck. And I thought, that's so weird. He's never cracked my neck in 8 years because I don't like my neck cracked. And as I'm thinking, why am I hearing this voice saying, don't, he cracks my neck. That crack where the aneurysm was so close to the artery feeding the brain, forced 3 of the clots in my brain. I suffered 3 strokes. So I went from a guy that was in better shape than most guys in their 20s that are athletes. I was in my 30s at the time, my mid-30s. To a guy that was, 95 years old and getting strokes. I couldn't stand up, I couldn't walk, I had vision problems, I still have a 10% loss in both eyes. And that voice obviously was God trying to warn me, and I paid no attention to it.
Obviously.
The biggest lesson was listen to that voice. And speaking of atheists, my atheist friend said that wasn't God. I go, we call it what you want, but in your life, how many times have you walked down a street by yourself somewhere at night, you're gonna go down an alleyway, and something in your head says you better not go that way? So call it what you want, but that was God talking to you.
Absolutely.
First of all, this is a big fat assertion. Call it what you want. That's God. Well, you can call it what you want too, Kevin Sorbo, but that doesn't make it God. I'm sorry. You can assert that it's God, but it doesn't make it so. You actually have to provide some evidence for that sort of thing, But let's just take him at his word and explore this point. So he alleges that every time you hear that voice in your head that tells you not to go down that alleyway or not to do this or not to do that, that's God guiding you, giving you some advice from within, shall we say. But what about all of the examples to the contrary? So he tells this story about having his neck cracked, which caused the strokes. And by the way, I'm so happy that he's better now. I wouldn't wish ill will on anybody, theist or non-theist or what have you. I'm just happy that he's okay, and I hope Kevin Sorbo lives a very long, happy and healthy life. I just want to get that out of the way. I'm not so callous and cruel, dear listener, that I lack humanity. I'm very, very happy to hear that he survived that, and I wish him all the best in the world. But he alleges that God spoke to him and said, don't let him crack your neck, but he just failed to listen, had the neck cracked, and it caused the health complications that we just heard. But what about all of the other people that day, or any other day for that matter, who heard a voice in their head that told them, you need to go for that operation, or you need to get this done, or you need to get that done, and it led to their demise? There are going to be people out there in the world who heard a voice in their head that said, you should really get that triple bypass operation. You should really get that heart operation. The clock is ticking. Your heart isn't healthy. You got to get it sorted. So then they go and they get the heart operation and they die on the operating table. Was that God leading them to their demise? Or do you have an alternative ad hoc explanation to get around that problem, Kevin Sorbo? Was that simply the voice of the devil? And if so, why wasn't God able to interrupt the devil's voice and give the contrary advice? Is God a psychopath, and did God lure that person to their own demise? Was God having an off day? Right? This is the kind of ridiculousness that you have to get into if you're going to start assuming that the voice in your head is God. Because the voice in our head can lead us to safety, but it can also lead us to harm. People can make poor decisions based on the little voice in their head. That's just what happens. That voice that says don't go down the dark alley might have led you to take an alternative path, and then lo and behold, when you go down that path, you get mugged. Lo and behold, you go down that path and you get hit by a bus, or you get hit by lightning, or some other tragedy befalls you. What's happening in those moments, Kevin Sorbo? Again, was that the devil? Did God just give bad advice in that day? Was that the person's own conscience and God was busy or neglected to tell them to do the opposite? How do you explain all of this? How do you get away from all of these problems? It is utterly ridiculous. And so we don't need to take it seriously, not least because the whole thing is an assertion to begin with, and that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed as such. Good old Hitchens. Boy, I miss him every single day. Hitchens would have tore this guy to shreds. I live in Hitch's shadow, I swear. But yeah, guys, this argument is just utterly appalling. And it doesn't serve as good evidence in the slightest. And the fact that Kevin Sorbo thinks that it does, again, leads me to believe that he's an idiot, folks. I'm sorry, I might have used that word more in this video than any other in recent memory, but I think it's accurate to say so. And with all that said, dear listener, that brings us to the end of the video. Did you enjoy it? If so, pop a like on the video. It costs you nothing and it helps out the channel enormously. If you enjoyed the video, you should also consider subscribing, because there are many more videos like this one that you could watch and that you could enjoy and that you could comment on. Speaking of comments, jump into the comments below and let me know your thoughts in depth. Do you agree with my criticisms? Do you have any constructive criticism? Could I have dealt with any of these arguments any better? Do you have any suggestions for me? Or perhaps you're a theist and you disagree fundamentally with my critique. Let me know. Tell me why I'm wrong. I often prioritize the comments that disagree with me in the comment section below, so I would love equally, if not more, to hear from you, dear listener. Lastly, if you'd like to take your support for the channel to the next level, jump into the description box below. When you get there, you'll find the link to my Patreon page. Click that link and you can sign up for as little as £3 per month, and depending on which tier you choose, you will gain access to a plethora of perks, bonuses, and extras. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.